Okay, well, again, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. We're really excited about the program that we have for this morning. Before introducing our speakers, I have a little something I'm going to read. It's a prayer that Molly has provided. It's called A Prayer for Migrant Children. Loving Father, in your infinite compassion, we seek your divine protection for refugee children who are often alone and afraid. Provide solace to those who have been witnesses to violence and destruction, who have lost parents, family, friends, home, and all they cherish due to war or persecution. Comfort them in their sorrow and bring help in their time of need. Show mercy to unaccompanied migrant children too, Lord. Reunite them with their families and loved ones. Guide those children who are strangers in a foreign land to a place of peace and safety. Comfort them in their sorrow and bring help in their time of need. Show us how we might reach out to these precious and vulnerable children. Open our hearts to migrant and refugee children in need so that we might see in them your own migrant son. Give us courage to stand up in their defense against those who would do them harm. And we say, Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, thank you, Molly. That couldn't have been more appropriate on the topic for today. So we're very happy to have Molly, an LACC member, is coordinating this program this morning, and she is going to speak on behalf of herself and the organization she's working with, and she's going to introduce her colleague, Mikaela, who will also be speaking. So Molly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sally. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We will start with a presentation about unaccompanied children. I'm joined by my colleague, Mikaela. We're both staff attorneys at Kids in Need of Defense, which we'll tell you about in a minute. Mikaela, prior to joining KIND, worked at Sanctuary for Families, another organization in New York that focuses on victims of sexual and gender-based violence. So Mikaela has been a great mentor to me since I joined KIND, and she recently returned from a 2-week work detail in Texas, and she will speak broadly about KIND's role in the emergency intake shelters that have just been set up. But because of some contractual limitations, she might not be able to answer all of our questions today. So with that, we will get started. And at the end of our presentation today, we will have an action item, and then hopefully if we have time, a Q&A and some border updates, if anyone has those. So let me start sharing the presentation. Okay, is that in presenting mode? Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay, so I want to start by showing a few statistics, and we are going to try to keep this very high level and not too much legal jargon and boring facts for you. So just to start off, Kids in Need of Defense is a nonprofit that focuses on the rights and well-being of children as they migrate alone. So we represent unaccompanied children, which we'll get to what that means in a minute here. But our mission is basically to ensure that every kid appearing in immigration court is represented by an attorney. You'll see at the bottom left-hand side of the screen that over half of children that are in immigration proceedings do not have an attorney, and children without representation are more than twice as likely to be deported. So even from a lawyer perspective, immigration proceedings are extremely complicated. So especially if you are a child without a lawyer, it is nearly impossible to understand what's going on. So KIND takes a very full approach to representing our children and advocating for our children. So we provide legal representation either directly, or we work with a lot of corporations and law firms that also provide legal services, and we serve as mentors to those attorneys. We also do a lot of advocacy work, and one of our colleagues recently spoke to the House on suggestions on child protection and other due process rights. And we also have some international offices now and do international work for children who are separated from families at the border, and also for kids who are sent home, especially those by themselves, to ensure that they have the proper protections when they get back to their country of origin. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen, we have 11 offices all over the country, which is very exciting because there's obviously a lot going on. Mikaela and I are both in the New York office, which has some unique challenges and clientele. So again, we'll talk about that going forward. So on to the next here. We've been around since 2008, 2009, and we've been able to refer and help 22,000 plus children, which is very exciting. Partner with a lot of organizations, almost 700. And what else did I want to point out here? Oh, and what else? That's about all from this slide. So as you can see, people have been very busy. So today what we're going to talk about is what is an unaccompanied child, some of the legal framework and common legal remedies. And what I want to mainly highlight in today's presentation is what happens to a child from the time they cross the border to when they end up with their sponsor or with their family, and eventually how they might get citizenship. So this is the definition of an unaccompanied alien child, a UAC, which we'll be saying today. It's defined by statute, and it is a child that has no lawful immigration status, that is under the age of 18 when they arrive at the border, and they have no parent or legal guardian available to provide care and physical custody in the United States. It's important to note that this definition is applied to the child when they cross the border. So a lot of children might have parents or guardians in the United States, but at the time that they actually are crossing the border and encounter Customs and Border Patrol, these things are true. The UAC definition is important for a lot of our children because it offers certain immigration benefits that are not accorded to other children who might cross with a parent. So turning now to this map of Central America, most of our children come from what we call the Northern Triangle countries, which are Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. We do have clients that come from all over the world, but the majority of our clients do come from these three countries. We have a lot of children who are native Spanish speakers, but also a fair amount that come from indigenous communities and speak indigenous languages. And I know Mikaela has worked with several of those clients recently. So next, how do unaccompanied minors get to the border? We've talked about this in some of our prior presentations, and I know a lot of you have spoken to people who have done this journey. And as you know, it's a very difficult and dangerous journey. The photo here that you see is one of the trains that some of our clients take to get to the US border. And something important to note is a lot of times when we meet our clients, the journey to the United States was so traumatizing that that's all that they might want to talk about initially, and less so what actually happened to them in their home country. But there's a lot of sexual violence, a lot of bribes, and other dangerous situations that they might encounter on the way, which, as you can imagine, for a child is much more dangerous and serious. Okay. Next, why are these children coming to the border? We've talked about this again many times before, but it's oftentimes a variety of factors that come together to make this child leave, especially a child that might need to leave on their own. So here are some of the reasons we often hear about when we meet our clients. Violence in their home country. Oftentimes there's a lot of gang violence in the neighborhoods that make it very unsafe for them to live there, to go to school, to go to church, and really just to be a kid. There might be some family abuse or some other kind of sexual abuse. We see often abandonment by one or both of their parents, poverty, or lack of education. Mikaela and I are currently working with a child who hasn't been able to have any formal education, and he is now a young teenager. So it's definitely a variety of factors. And again, sometimes our clients will travel with their parents up to the border, but it could also be with an older sibling, or they might have an older sibling in the US and they're coming to reunite with their family here. So on this slide, I have some facts about Kind New York's office. This is probably different depending on where you are in the country, but the average client that we're seeing is about 15. We have about half and half boy and girls. And as I mentioned, most of our clients are from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and most speak Spanish. I will note that I've heard from a colleague that a lot of the children that are coming in this most recent wave of migrants that make their way to the New York office have been boys around the age of 16 or 17. All right, let me make sure I didn't miss anything before I pass off to Mikaela. I think that is good. So Mikaela, take it over.
Awesome. So as Molly mentioned, there's a very complicated legal framework that exists that all of these kids are trying to deal with. Typically, because our clients are unaccompanied children, they're trying to deal with this on their own. That means that they have to navigate complex systems in a foreign language, often without any guidance or support. So immigration is technically, for most of our clients at least, a civil offense. That means that generally you're not entitled to an attorney unless you can afford one or find a nonprofit to represent you. You're not automatically entitled to one like you would be with a criminal case, where the state would appoint an attorney if you can't afford one. This is incredibly prohibitive for a lot of migrant families that are fleeing here for reasons tied to an extreme amount of poverty in their home country. So, however, the reason family separation happened and grounds that exist under those frameworks is because immigration can be considered criminal if it's a re-entry, or which normally means that someone was previously deported. So in a lot of those cases, what we saw is that the child's parent may have already been in the United States previously, where they were then arrested for some sort of crime. They could have been very minor, like a minor possession of marijuana, through more extreme crimes. Or simply they were just deported because they were here without permission. So when they came back with the child, the federal government chose to prosecute those crimes criminally. However, the children were not charged criminally, so they were simply put into the immigration process. Therefore, they were separated. Under previous administrations and what the Biden administration and the Trump administration at the end turned back to was processing them as family units. This allowed the parents and children to stay together. However, oftentimes the kids, when they come, they don't come with an actual biological parent. They come with a caretaker, especially the very young children do come with a caretaker, but the caretaker might not have legal ability to care for this child. So it might be a grandparent or an aunt, uncle, older sibling who basically raised the child but doesn't have official paperwork. So the government will still separate those children in order to in order to protect them from trafficking situations, which is sometimes the case, although not necessarily as broadly as it is applied. Next slide, please. So the systems that exist that all interact over immigration cases include the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice on the federal side, and then state courts in some certain situations. So the Department of Homeland Security includes Customs and Border Patrol, which are the same people that would like stamp your passport at the airport, or when you're crossing at a land border. The Department of Health and it also includes Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, who are also present at the airports. They're the ones to whom you have to disclose if like you're bringing in goods that amount to more than a certain amount of money. Obviously, the side to Department of Homeland Security that our clients typically see is a little bit of a different side, which is that they previously crossed the border and are being picked up somewhere in the desert or on the highways in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, or California. Then there's the Department of Health and Human Services. This is the agency that's actually tasked with providing care for children in the immigration process. So even though a child might be picked up by Customs and Border Patrol or Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, they are technically supposed to be transferred to the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is under Health and Human Services. And that agency is the agency that's supposed to look after them and eventually release them to a caretaker in the United States. The Department of Justice oversees the immigration courts. So immigration courts are not typical courts, which means that the Attorney General is the person who can issue binding precedent and pay raises, can set case quota numbers for the immigration courts. So it's not an independent body like typical courts are. Also, what's interesting is in the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which is the immigration courts, the party at play that is normally the government's attorney is from the Department of Homeland Security under ICE, so Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So it's two federal agencies with then a respondent immigrant who is in proceedings. And finally, there's the state courts. We see this most commonly with special immigrant juvenile status, which Molly will talk about a bit later in the presentation. But this is particularly important for a lot of our child clients. It comes less into play with adult clients. So what happens when a child arrives here? You see here in this flow chart the interaction with the different agencies. So it starts when the child is detained at the border by Customs and Border Patrol, or sometimes Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Once they're determined to be under 18 and without a parent, they're designated as an unaccompanied child by Customs and Border Patrol or ICE. And then they're transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. That is, so the Office of Refugee Resettlement is under the Department of Health and Human Services, and they're tasked with caring for the children. They have both short-term facilities and long-term facilities. They also have different levels of care, from foster care programs to shelters for children who might have, or group home equivalents for children who might have mental health needs, or are security risks or flight risks. So the ORR shelter is supposed to find the child a sponsor. The sponsor in a lot of cases is a parent who's already in the United States, but it could also be a sibling, cousin, aunt, uncle, anyone over 18. They don't need to have legal status in the United States. However, ORR does request fingerprinting and home studies to make sure that the child will be safe in the home. The releases can vary in the amount of time they take depending on who the sponsor might be. However, if a sponsor can't be found, which right now I'm working with a child who has been in the custody of ORR for over 2 years because he has no one in this country but he also doesn't want to return to his home country because he has no one there either. So he has been at a long-term ORR facility. Some of those are like foster homes, and others are more like a group home setup. It really depends on the child, and again, whether they're considered a flight risk, or anything else. However, this transfer to sponsor or has to happen before the child turns 18. If the child turns 18 while they are still in ORR custody, they will, depending on the circumstances, potentially be transferred to ICE adult detention, which is basically like a jail. They are not, provided for the same way. There's no focus on their education or access to the outdoors or any of those protections that apply for children. Once a child, though, is transferred to a long-term ORR facility or to a sponsor, immigration proceedings are initiated. That's where the Department of Homeland Security, the ICE attorney, will file what's called a charging document in immigration court. So it's as if someone was arrested by the police and they file the arrest report. Once that happens, removal proceedings are initiated and the child will have to appear before the immigration court in order to either apply for relief for removal, which we'll talk about some of those that are pretty common in our cases, or if they don't have relief, they'll be ordered deported, or they can ask for voluntary departure. Kind did a lot of voluntary departure cases back when family separation was a big thing. We worked with a lot of very young children who were separated from their parents, where the child really just wanted to return home because the parent had already been deported. Personally, I worked with a couple of cases. For example, in one of them, I was representing a 3-year-old who was nonverbal. And all he really was able to tell me is that he missed mommy and daddy. Most of the work involved, calling the parents in the home country and trying to make sure that the situation he was going back to would be safe for him. But in that case, he didn't want to stay here without his parents, and his parents weren't here. So we got him permission to return to the home country. So the emergency intake sites, what are they? I think this is the big question everyone has. And so what happened when the Biden administration rolled back some of the bars to entry for minors that the Trump administration had put in place due to COVID-19, all of a sudden there were all these kids who were near the border, or the normal surges happen in the spring months when the temperature is more moderate in that part of the world. So generally, a lot of kids showed up at the border very quickly. Some of them may have already been on their way. It's really impossible to say if it was caused by that or what happened, but all of a sudden there were all of these kids at the border. And Customs and Border Patrol is not supposed to keep custody of these children for longer than necessary. They're supposed to transfer them to ORR. However, the Office of Refugee Resettlement Shelters quickly reached capacity, and they didn't have any more beds. So they created these emergency intake sites in order to get the children out of the custody of Customs and Border Patrol and into a more child-friendly environment and into the care of people who knew the reunification process and who know what the rights of children should be while they're in detention. So they set up these sites in San Diego, San Antonio, Dallas, Midland, and El Paso in order to absorb the influx of children and get them transferred from Customs and Border Patrol to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And then once these children were transferred, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, one of the things that they're supposed to provide the children with when they're in detention is know your rights presentations and legal screenings. In order to do that, the Office of Refugee Resettlement contracted directly with Kind to provide those services to the children. So with government contracts, typically as soon as you sign the contract, you're expected to begin providing services. So while Kind immediately posted job openings for those positions, in order to immediately begin providing services, they detailed staff from other offices to assist with this influx of children and begin the initial process of providing know your rights and legal screenings at these sites. However, the goal of these sites is either to release children to sponsors or transfer them to long-term care facilities. So for example, yesterday when I was in the office assisting with Kind works with one detained shelter in New York City, which is Cayuga. There are others. I've worked on other cases with Abbott House. Molly and I are currently working with JCC. But generally, so yesterday while I was assisting with a detained visit at Cayuga, I worked with 2 children who had previously been at the San Antonio EIS site. They were then transferred to Cayuga because it wasn't possible to release them as quickly as the EIS site was trying to do, most likely, based on who their proposed sponsor was. Because again, if the sponsor is not a parent, it can take longer to prove the family relationship and clear the release with the sponsor. I think that's it on that point. I know that was a lot of information. And there's a lot of different players. So we will definitely, hopefully have time for some questions at the end.
Mikaela, can you remind me how many beds are at the Cayuga facility in Manhattan?
So Cayuga, in the short-term care facility, which is the one that Kind works with, there are 900 beds.
So in our office, there's the team that works with children who are released to sponsors. Mikaela and I are on that team. And we also have a team that works with detained children at Cayuga. So those children are currently coming to our offices for legal screening. And so I think that's what Mikaela was just referring to.
Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier.
No, that's okay. I added that slide without you. All right, back to you.
So generally, when these children are pursuing relief, there's multiple forums. As we mentioned, like before, sometimes state courts come into play. They're always in immigration court. However, most humanitarian applications for relief are first assessed at USCIS, or United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is under the Department of Homeland Security. USCIS is also the organization that would process applications like marriage-based petitions, work visas like H-1Bs. They also handle the diversity lottery. So they really process all affirmative applications, which means anything that's the immigration court, which is defensive, can't grant. Typically, our children, because they're minors, one of the protections that they're entitled to is that they get a shot at everything affirmatively first, which means that they sometimes get 2 shots at the benefit, taking into account that in an adversarial proceeding, like a court where they can be cross-examined, might be, very intimidating for a child of 5 or 6 years old, versus a less intimidating atmosphere in an office where they're simply being interviewed versus being like crossed. So the first common legal remedy for our clients is asylum. A lot of people have heard a little bit about asylum, but generally, asylum requires a well-founded fear of future persecution based on past persecution and or a risk of future persecution on account of one of 5 protected grounds, where the persecutor is a government actor or non-governmental actor that the government is unwilling or unable to control. So these 5 grounds are the most complicated part, really, of winning an asylum case. Generally, like race, religion, and nationality are pretty straightforward. However, when it comes to political opinion and particular social group, it becomes much more complicated, specifically with particular social group where there is no actual definition of what this should be. Rather, it's a time when lawyers have to apply previous decisions to your client's case to see if there's a way to make an argument for something. So moving to the next slide, typical asylum scenarios that we see with our clients include gang-related, domestic violence, family relationships, sexual orientation, street children, or gender-based violence. However, a lot of these are more complicated because of that last prong of the asylum definition, which is the government being unable or unwilling to protect you. And most of these, as you can see, are normally going to be a private actor, right? So a gang is not technically the government. So in order for a gang targeting someone like church members, we've definitely had kids, who are targeted for their religious beliefs. But showing it, that the gang is doing it, and then you have to show that the government is unable or unwilling to protect you from the gang. That's a lot more complicated than, for example, with some of our, for example, a Bengali client who is Hindu being persecuted by the government that is more Muslim. And that's just like a random example. But generally, those gang-related cases are more complicated, specifically because it's not the government doing the persecution. Also because it's unfortunately super common. And one of the other prongs to these particular social groups is showing that the group is defined with particularity, which when the gangs are really extorting everyone and potentially going after everyone in the community, it's hard to show that there's a particular reason that they're targeting you. So even if, you're going to the evangelical church and you think that's why you're being persecuted, if your entire community is evangelical and you're all going to the evangelical church and the gang is targeting everyone, it's harder to show that there's a specific reason that they're targeting you. Or that there's a specific reason. The same is true with domestic violence, whether it's by parents, a spouse, a partner. It can be super hard to prove that the government is unable or unwilling to protect you. I have seen cases where the parent or spouse is actually in jail for it. Like the client went to the police, got an order of protection, and then the person was in jail overnight, but then they were released the next day and they came back and attacked them again. A lot of times those cases are easier to show that the government is unable to do anything about this crime, even if they were willing to help. So asylum is offers some incredible benefits. The first is that even though it takes a while for asylum claims to be adjudicated, which means decided on, you can qualify for permission to work or an employment authorization document while your application is pending. Additionally, once you are awarded asylum, it's a permanent benefit. Asylum doesn't expire. It's not something, so while you do become eligible for a green card and then citizenship, you actually don't have to. You can just stay with asylum status for almost forever. You can immediately receive certain benefits. And you can never be removed to the country of persecution. However, this also comes with some consequences for some of our clients, because once you're awarded asylum, you still can't return to your home country. So the big place that this becomes, sometimes problematic is if they were raised maybe by a grandparent or a family member who has become ill in the home country, and they can't return, which can be very hard to explain to someone that even though you have legal status here, you can't go back to that country and see that person. Sometimes we are able to work with them to go to a third country. So for example, if your client is Guatemalan and has asylum from Guatemala, they could technically go to El Salvador. So they could go to El Salvador and their family member might be able to go to El Salvador as well so that they can see that person. So some typical, not typical because no asylum claim is the same, but some asylum claims that we've recently seen being successful include a Indigenous Guatemalan girl who spoke out very strongly about the rights of women in her Indigenous community and was persecuted because of that. We were actually very scared about this case because unfortunately, as I mentioned, it's super hard to show that private actors are being condoned by the government, but we recently received her grant of asylum. So that was super exciting for our office. We've also seen some other grants recently. But generally, we see all sorts of cases for asylum, from a Bengali client who was persecuted on account of their membership in a political party, to the same in Africa and countries. We also have a lot of Central American kids who were targeted by gangs, unfortunately. We also have some mental health related asylum claims and LGBTQ ones in our office right
now. Thank you, Mikaela. So as Mikaela mentioned, when a child comes to our office and they say, how can I stay in the United States? We do a legal screening for asylum, as Mikaela just explained, and then another screening that we'll do is for special immigrant juvenile status, which we call SIDJ for short. SIDJ is a really incredible benefit, and it's applicable to a large majority of our clients that come into the office. And the amazing thing about SIDJ is that it does have, if you can get past these initial stages I'll explain, it has a pretty clear path to a green card and then to citizenship. So this is a great option for our children if they are eligible. So what SIDJ is you have to be under 21 to apply for this visa status. You have to have been abandoned, abused, or neglected by one or both of your parents. You have to be unmarried, and you have to show that it's not in your best interest to return to your home country. So what does this look like in practice? We see kids come in, a lot of kids who come to the US, might come from a home where they never knew their father, or one of their parents might have been killed, or they might have been abused by their parents. So Mikaela and I have a lot of cases right now where maybe one of the parents died when the child was young. They would be eligible for SIDJ. Maybe the dad had abused them when they were young, never let them go to school, made them work all day in the fields. They would be eligible for SIDJ. So this is, again, just a really powerful tool for these kids to eventually get a green card and be able to stay in the United States. This is kind of boring legal part, but how it works is we first start in family court and work to get them a guardianship or custody petition granted, which can be the guardian or custodian can be a parent or brother or sister or aunt or uncle, family friend. It depends on the circumstances. They then will apply to get a SIDJ order from the immigration side of things. They get in line for a visa that currently takes about 2 to 3 years, and then they can apply for their green card. So, I will just mention when a kid walks into our office and says, how can I stay here? We often preface this with saying, this is going to take a long time, but if we start today, it's better than not starting at all. But the typical SIDJ case, for example, will take about 4 to 5 years from start to finish. So it's until they get their green card, and then obviously more time before citizenship. Mikaela is our T and U expert in the office, so I'll turn back to her to describe what these visas are. And again, we're describing the sort of 4 main ways that a child might be able to get a green card eventually. And Mikaela and I are working on a T visa case together right now.
So in my life prior to KIND, I had a lot of experience doing U and T visas. Less of our clients at KIND actually qualify for U visas because a U visa is for victims of serious crimes in the United States who cooperate with law enforcement. Most of our clients at KIND are recent arrivals. So thank God they haven't been here. They haven't been victims of crimes in the United States in the short amount of time that they've been living here. This is a lot more common with people who may have been living here for longer. There is a list of the qualifying crimes, and you do have to report to a certifying agency and go through the process of getting them to then sign a certification saying that you were helpful in the investigation and or prosecution of the crime. At KIND, though, I do have a few U visa cases. One of them is actually a unique cyber stalking case that I worked with the clients, in which they received incredibly threatening, harassing messages over Facebook, in which someone actually created a fraudulent account in one of the girls' names and started sending provocative messages to members of her church, actually, including the pastor, which made her very uncomfortable. She was very afraid of the situation. She didn't know who was doing it. But we were able to report to a police officer. I was able to actually assist her in the reporting, in that I arranged an appointment. In New York City, we have these incredible organizations called Family Justice Centers, which work specifically with victims of sexual and gender-based violence. So we were able to meet with a Spanish-speaking police officer at one of these locations and report the crime in a way that was very sensitive to the girl's emotional state, in a way that some precincts might not be. Then there's T visas, which is for persons in the United States now on account of sex or labor trafficking. Children do not need to show helpfulness to law enforcement, but adults do. Unlike a U visa, though, you don't actually need the law enforcement agency to sign off on this. You just need to show proof that you attempted to report the crime. Some trafficking situations, depending on who you report to, may not really be investigated, especially if the trafficking happened significantly long ago, or it's more of a one-off situation. It might not be something that the government is super interested in pursuing. Other cases that might be tied to trafficking rings or more developed organizations are more likely to be prosecuted. Again, though, it depends on who you report to, because for both of these, there's different certifying agencies. For example, in New York City, for a U visa, you can report to the Administration for Children's Services, or ACS, which handles like child protective matters. For T visas, you can report to ICE, you can report to local law enforcement, you can report to Department of Labor in certain situations. So there's a wide variety of reporting criteria that exist. So T visas are the most comprehensive in terms of benefits and assistance for family members. If you are the victim of trafficking, you can basically apply for legal status. Once your T visa is granted, you can apply for legal status in the United States for any family member that you can show might be at risk because of your trafficking situation. So this allows, especially for our younger clients, for them to apply to bring their parents here to provide them with the emotional support they might need to recover from the crime, as well as, stability in getting their family members who are already here legal status, the ability to work, and better support them so they don't, become victims of trafficking again. They're also granted fairly quickly compared to most of the other benefits we've mentioned. Normally, a T visa is adjudicated in somewhere, I believe it's between like 18 and 24 months, which is super quick for the timeline of immigration benefits, where, Sage could take 4 or 5 years to get a green card. U visas, on the other hand, also allow for a lot of petitioning for family members and a lot of those additional supports. However, they are by far one of the longest benefits. The federal government, when they authorized the U visa, thought that there were only 10,000 victims of crime in the United States who are undocumented per year. So they only allotted 10,000 visas. There are way more applicants per year. I think the last report is that there's closer to 70,000 applicants a year, and about 60,000 are deemed to qualify for it. So instead of denying the other 50,000 that there weren't visas for, they created a wait list. So those people get their name on the wait list, and the next year they take 10,000 people off that wait list. Right now, it's taking somewhere between 10 to 15 years to get a U visa, which means during that time, you have no status, you're still at risk of deportation. In order to try to alleviate this, the federal government did create, or USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, who adjudicates these visas, came up with something called deferred action for U visa applicants, which is that they read your application about 3 or 4 years after you mailed it, and they decide that you're prima facie eligible for it, even though they don't have a visa available for you. At that time, they give you a work permit, and they say, we will try not to deport you while you wait for your U visa. So here's this like benefit, so you can like live here, you can work here, and have some semblance of a normal life while you wait the 15 years. This becomes super problematic for derivatives, which is if a parent applied for the visa and they get this prima facie determination and they applied for their children who are under 21 when they submitted or under 18 when they applied, the child has to remain unmarried to qualify for this benefit. So if the child was 17, they now have to wait 15 years from then to potentially get married, which can be super problematic, especially for a lot of very religious families where the child, wants to have wants to get pregnant. The idea of having a baby out of wedlock, all of those types of things definitely become, super problematic in discussing this with clients. On our end at Kind, we don't see that as much because our clients are the children. What we do see, though, is that when they apply, like for a parent who might be in the home country, that the parent has to wait the 15 years to come to the United States. So it's still a super long process. It is great that they can apply for these people, but the waiting time is very, not prohibitive, but very complicated in these situations.
Okay, just in the essence of time, I'm going to skip this last slide that explains some of our client interview techniques. But we want to open it up to questions, and then I do want to share our action item for today.
I wanted to ask if one of the things that's proposed in a new immigration law, comprehensive immigration law, would remove that wait of 15 years because that seems unreasonable, inhumane, and that's why people come and become undocumented because they can't wait 15 years. So will that be part of a comprehensive immigration bill?
So I haven't seen that anywhere because the U visas are actually authorized through a separate act. Right now, there's actually an ongoing lawsuit about the 4 years to wait for the initial determination. And the government is actually saying they don't even want to give them that while they're waiting. So right now that's up being adjudicated by the courts. But there hasn't been more talk about expanding the number of U visas issued per year. At least I haven't heard of it.
And Kind is also involved in, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, why is that not part of the immigration process? Why is that separate?
So different benefits, especially some of these humanitarian benefits, are like codified differently, like under the Violence Against Women Act, which includes other protections that exist. Like we didn't talk about like spouses of US citizens or permanent residents who don't have status can apply for status if there's domestic violence. So there's a lot of so the humanitarian benefits are often added somewhere else. They're a little different than like general family benefits or work visa numbers, which come out in other places. So it would be great if they did do a completely comprehensive plan. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem at this time that, that they're able to really lump everything together. I think, there's talk about applying benefits for dreamers. There's talk about the general undocumented population, but things are still a little separated.
All right, we can still take questions. I just want to drop in the chat here and then share my screen quickly. As I mentioned, Kind does a lot of advocacy, especially with the Biden administration. Sorry, one second. So on our website, there are a few different action items that we encourage everyone to take, and I dropped the the link in the chat so you can take time to review this. But we have a petition asking for certain protections for kids. We have a link to write a letter to your congressional representative, how to call your representative, and there are some talking points if you click into each of these about what specifically we're asking for. And
I will just add regarding contacting your congressional representative, that is super helpful. Like right now with my U visa client, I'm actually fighting a court order that's basically trying to get her ordered deported while her U visa is getting adjudicated. And we reached out to Senator Gillibrand's office, who is our senator in New York. And they're actually doing a congressional inquiry into her case to try to get that decision made faster. So reaching out to your Congress people can be super helpful when those types of requests then come in, because obviously our clients don't vote. So it's really, your actions in your showing your congressional representatives that these matters are important to you that make the biggest difference. Because a lot of times the stances that they take on issues are what their voters want. And the people that they're trying to help can't vote and probably won't be able to vote for a long time.
And I'll just note one more thing, that we also have some volunteer opportunities. I know some people on this call have gone to the border before. So if anyone is interested in learning more about how to actually volunteer with some of those projects we mentioned, the ORR projects, that is also a possibility. And I think we also are always looking for Spanish interpreters. So these all require Spanish fluency, but those are both in the chat if needed. And I think you're all ready to become immigration lawyers now.
Wonderful.
Sorry if that was a
Molly.
bit overkill on the legal side, but it is nice to understand like what actually happens to this child once they get here. What should their expectations be of when they can get a green card and move forward with their lives in terms of their immigration case.
Molly and Mikaela, thank you both so much. This was so informative. And no, none of us is ready to become an immigration lawyer, but I think we've all acquired greater respect and admiration and appreciation for the work that you do.
Absolutely.
I sometimes wonder how you can do this work day after day after day when the regulations you have to deal with are so frustrating, which is a mild adjective. They are so inhumane. For a child to be deported while they are going through a 15-year process, it's just, I have no words. Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, the other day I got to give a client a green card, and that makes this all worth it.
Oh,
It's
okay.
so great.
We celebrate that with you.
I was going to ask about the success rate, and how you cope with that, that work fatigue or just spinning your wheels and feeling like nothing is maybe changing. So that's a great story to tell.
Yeah, I've actually had a couple of clients that have graduated from high school that are currently enrolled in colleges in the New York City area. One of my clients last year actually graduated salutatorian of his high school class. So, there's definitely the successes along the way. And I think as an office and as a team, we try to, acknowledge those as much as possible. Because we are working incredibly hard against an incredibly hard system. But these kids, would be doing it alone. So I think knowing that we're in that corner fighting for them is one of the most rewarding parts of this job for me.
Yeah. Well, Mikaela, I'll just say that we in Loretto are so very grateful and proud that we have Molly Kammien as one of us. And she's made wonderful contributions to Loretto, and I'm sure she's making wonderful contributions to Kind as well.
It's been incredible working with her.
Right.
Mikaela's teaching me everything every day. I ask a lot of questions.
You do an incredible job.
Well, Mikaela, thanks for being willing to join us this morning and help Molly with the update. It was really, really effective and useful for us.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, do we have anyone with border updates for us? Mary Jean, anybody else?
I haven't heard from Bob, and I don't know if he's in the desert. I do know that I just heard from Lisa and Kind. She has worked with Kind with the UN from Tijuana. So, but she didn't tell me what she did, but she said they're an incredible help down, in San Diego. So
And tell us who Lisa is.
Lisa is my daughter-in-law who has a 3-month-old, and she and Michael are staying with me now for a little while. They're trying to work with the Mexican consulate, the Irish consulate, and the American consulate. So I wish we had Molly and Mikaela here to help them. I mean, they're educated, they've gone to the system is horrible.
Yeah.
They get everything they need, and then it all has to be stamped again in Ireland. They're from, Lisa she's an Irish citizen, but they live in Tijuana and work there.
Yeah.
So anyway.
All right.
I will say, just in regards to that, that Kind is expanding within Europe. I'm not sure if the office is in the UK or Ireland, but there is an office there. And we are also currently actually hiring, I think, for a staff attorney in Tijuana. We are incorporated in Mexico at this point. So we do a lot of work with the Mexican government as well.
Yeah. Are you in San Diego, Mikaela?
So I'm based out of New York with Molly. But we are providing services at the EIS site in San Diego.
Okay. Right.
Our office in California is in Fresno, San Francisco. Like there's a San Francisco Fresno office and then an LA office, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's awesome.
So yes, we're all over at this point.
That is awesome.
That's great. That's great. We are so
Thank you
happy to
so
know of
much.
your organization. Yeah. Anyone else? Last minute comments? Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks to Molly
Yes, and thank you,
Mikaela.
Molly. This was great. And Mikaela.
Good.
for organizing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Right.
sticking with us through the